Welcome to Main Street Podcast, an opportunity to talk to Idaho's elected leaders about the issues that matter to you. Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast. We're here with Senator Dave Lent out of District 33, right in the heart of Idaho Falls. Senator, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
You've had a busy morning. You have already been to the gym. You've already played racquetball. You've already read the news. And you're up all night listening to Taylor Swift's new album. So we've checked all the boxes.
And I also tried to fix the monitor on my wife's computer this morning.
Look at you. You do it all. I joke about the Taylor Swift album because I made reference before we started that I was going to ask you questions. And you knew that not only it was an album, but it was a double album.
Oh, yeah.
So we can get your take on anything, I guess. You're in the know.
Well, I have a granddaughter that's a junior in high school. It's a Swiftie.
Oh, there we go.
So I like to be a little prepared when I'm around her to kind of give her a little bit of a twinge.
You can talk to the grandkids.
Hey, yeah. She thinks I'm pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you're pretty cool too, but for different reasons. Senator, you finished up another session. Is it getting easier?
No, it's not getting easier. I think for me, the further I go in my experience in the legislature, of course, the deeper you get. And it's almost like you start to really set some anchors deep that really pull you into a lot of conversations. For example, it's not uncommon now to be, once or twice a week get called to the governor's office to say, let's have a discussion about this, or what are you thinking about that? So I find the more I'm there, the longer I'm there. And for me, leadership is about influence.
Sure.
So that's how I measure my success. Are people asking me the right kind of questions? Am I involved in the right kind of decisions? And I think that's important as a legislator, to be involved in those critical decisions and conversations that take place.
Your influence is obviously increasing in the legislature as you get more roles and you're in more of those discussions. Do you find that you're influencing the things that you need to influence?
You know what? That's a great question, because we see a lot of focus on kind of culture issues, the library. Those are important issues, no doubt. And we need to pay attention to those, but they really shouldn't suck all the air out of the room and take our time, energy, and emotion. And sometimes that's what's happening. So I really like focusing on back to fundamentals. Let's focus on our economy. Let's focus on southeastern Idaho. Let's focus on what's best for Bonneville County and Idaho Falls and our residents. And how am I representing the residents of Bonneville County versus factions? Because you see that all the time, especially in Boise. You have people pulling at you all the time with their special interest this and special interest that. But it's a great experience. I enjoy it very much. I appreciate serving at the will of the people. I love Idaho Falls, and I love the people here, and that's why I serve.
Because we talked to some senators that have these massive districts where they're traveling over 5-6 counties. You're a homegrown guy. It's right here, and you get to walk around, and you get to it's a big district in terms of population, but you don't have to travel much distance. Do you find that you are getting to know all the right people as your tenure in the legislature increases?
I think so. I spoke at the Rotary last week, and one of the comments I made right off the bat was, it feels good to be among people I know.
Yeah.
And as I looked around the room, I think I knew most of them in there. And so between my wife's business, for many years in her music profession and being involved on a school board, you really get to know a lot of people in Idaho Falls and appreciate them. And what's good about that is they then can call me and we have those conversations, and I know people have some great input, and that's important.
Yeah. So your career was spent in part in adult education and training. Mm-hmm. If you were to put that hat back on and were tasked with going back to the legislature and doing some training for the elected leaders, what do you think is the training that they could use to be a more effective body?
Well, there's two parts of that question. One, when you were asking that question, what came to mind was school boards.
Yes.
And I've been a champion of providing training for school boards, because in my role at the site, one of my responsibilities was leadership training. And as I try to explain to people, in the corporate world, you would never put anyone in that position of responsibility that you have as a school board member without some very, formal training to help them understand, number one, and number two, to build their capacity. The second part of that question is the legislature. There is so much to learn. The way I explain it, it's kind of like going to college and showing up in the spring of your senior year and expecting to be able to just jump in and go. Where most of us, when we have an experience like that, the first thing we learn is, where's the bathroom?
Yeah.
Where's the library? Where's the bathroom? What? And so the legislature is very much like that at so many different levels, and then the complexity that comes with the politics that go on that add another dimension, layers of complexity. So for the most part, I think legislators, what I would tell them, that's a good question. If I sit down and let me write a course on how to be a good legislator, I would say the first thing is learn to have an open mind. Learn to look at every situation from both sides and then go from there. And then apply the values and your history and your constituents, apply all that to it. But first, Covey wasn't far off when he said that seek first to understand. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important as a legislator. Understand the issue, understand both sides so that you can make an informed decision and vote.
What do you think is the largest obstacle to legislators having open minds when it comes to dealing with how they're going to vote or their jobs?
Certainly there are lobbyists. We're all familiar with lobbyists, but what we find nowadays is the ideology lobby is so strong that it's by far the strongest thing happening in Boise is that pressure that comes to vote with one certain ideology or another. And the result is people just get in the habit of, every morning when you open up your computer, you look at it and it says, here's the bills coming up today and here's how you should vote. And if you don't vote, here's what's going to happen. So that is a bad trap to fall into.
Yeah.
It's an easy trap to fall into. And what happens is you basically get manipulated by people. So you have to really push back on that.
Because it's easier that way. And particularly, you might be able to protect your seat that way.
Absolutely. When you get people telling you, we'll make sure you get elected.
Yeah.
And when you say easier, when you're really looking at, several hundred, 400 or 500 bills a year coming at you in 3 months, actually more like 6 to 8 weeks when they really start rolling in, that is a load.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you add, so we have some good folks from southeastern Idaho, Senator Cook, Senator Burtonshaw, Senator Furness, Senator Van Orden. All of us also serve on JFAC, which normally in the legislature, you only have one major job. So JFAC is considered one of the most important jobs you could have there. For a lot of us, we're also chairman of committees. So that's another one. So for many of us this year and last year, it has been a full day. Those days are 12 to 14 hours, and it's about as fast as you can take it in happening. But it's a great experience, and it's great to be able to be there and try to be an influence for good.
You don't line your own pockets in this job. Nobody's getting rich doing it, quite the opposite. And you don't get to line the pockets of your friends in this job, which tends to be motivation for people in the private sector to spend their time. You must feel like you're making enough of a difference to want to keep putting in those 14-hour days away from your wife, away from the grandkids.
Well, it's really true. And I have a joke with my buddies I play racquetball with about lining my pockets. And then I show them my pockets and, nothing in there. So that's kind of a private joke we have. But it is. It is a big commitment. The way I explain it is in the end, you have to pay to play. It really costs you, not only in your time, but by the time you go through the election process and, what's your time worth to be away from family and other things. So it is a challenge, but it's that intrinsic value that and that's why for me, I serve at the will of the people.
Yeah.
And as long as they think I'm doing good and representing them, I'm good and I feel good. I feel very good about the things I've been able to accomplish in the last 6 years I've been there.
Do you feel there's an evolution in the legislature as a whole? Do you see that it goes through ebbs and flows, or it's just primarily building up to either more ideological, less ideological? You would think that the experience would just keep going up, but it doesn't work like that because people either lose or they retire, and then you start fresh with new bodies by design. Or does it just feel like you're constantly kind of behind the eight ball as a body?
Well, in the Senate this year, we had quite a turnover this last 2 years, and it brought into our caucus a different element than we had before as far as ideology. Mm-hmm. And so we have dealt with that, And that first year was a little tougher because a lot of the new folks that come in, again, they were trying to really understand the lay of the land and how you operate in that space. Before you're elected, you're going to take the world and chew it up and spit it out. I was listening to somebody on the radio this morning, and and I thought, oh boy, that you're up against a couple of brick walls there. But because when you get there, you have to really operate in a system that's there.
Yeah.
You can't really just go tear it down and start over. So it has been a challenge. We have had our times, but I would just share with you one experience we had at the beginning of the session in our JFAC. There was some issues about the process and a change that was there. Some of us disagreed on the process. We had a number of meetings with our leadership on that. And it came down for us in the Senate side. We actually had a special caucus meeting. We talked about it. We presented both sides of the issue. And then as a caucus, we took a vote on it. And then we moved forward with the vote. And that was our commitment. And I think that's the representative democracy that we live in, is let's present the ideas, let's evaluate them, look at both sides, let's make a decision, and then let's go forward. So that worked very well for us. It was a great experience, and it worked.
You talk about some of the stuff you've been able to do in these last few sessions that you're pretty proud of. Is it safe to say that you'd consider particularly what you've done with education historic this last session?
Well, last session and the session before.
Yeah.
So I was asked by the governor to carry the launch bill last year, and this year I carried the funding for the launch bill, which our appropriation bill for that was $71 million approximately. So that alone is a game changer. Launch alone is a game changer. When you figure that 2/3 of our state population doesn't graduate from college, doesn't make it all the way to the end. A lot of them attend, but doesn't make it to the end. And we're in a culture where if you don't make it to the end, you really don't get the prize.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get I've got a 3-year graduation from ISU or whatever the case may be. So, and we see at the same time, our culture evolves so fast with technology. And I was looking at some numbers this morning, and I was thinking back to my grandparents and history of education over the last 100 years. And in 1910, I was thinking maybe that's when my great-grandfather maybe graduated from high school. Only 10% of the population graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And they went for 100 hours on average a year. Of course, it was probably a one-room school. And we see today that that's so different. But what we see is we're still basically on the same content. It's the same fundamentals that we were dealing with 100 years ago. So evolving the education system has been just a great journey for me. The money that we put in both in K-12, the bill that I passed for the middle school career exploration, get kids kind of lined out for when they hit 9th grade and go into high school. They get those career paths lined out. Those have been big changers for education. And now as we look to the funding of facilities, that is an issue that has been on our radar, on the state's radar for 30 years plus, is the way the state interacts with the local communities and districts in how they fund schools. So again, two great things in the last 2 sessions that really, I think, have been a game changer for education.
What do you think is driving this new culture shift towards a focus on education, Idaho? Because it seemed like there was a lot of time spent, not that it was ever ignored, but these are all issues that weren't priorities. And now, as of recent, you talk about these 2 things, and then you didn't even add in the teacher pay and the teacher benefits. And it seems like there is significant momentum behind education policy in Idaho. Why is that?
I think we're realizing that if we're going to have a vibrant economy, and if we are, one of the fastest growing states in the country, and we want to attract the right kind of things here for our young people to have jobs and to live in the place where we grew up and enjoy the things we grew up with, we're going to have to build that economy. And that starts with one of the pillars is a great education system that literally provides a pipeline for the right kind of jobs. I mean, it's one thing to go and graduate from high school and get your certificate. It's another thing to go to college and get something. But we really have this alignment going on now. When we think about the INL and the work there and the potential that we have now as we move into this new era of, it's a resurgence really, literally worldwide of nuclear energy. And here we are as the lead nuclear energy lab in the United States. We have such potential here. So what we're doing really is trying to align K-12 and higher ed to be the pipeline to feed into these kind of jobs. And that requires some thinking, it requires some strategy, and it requires some evolving of our process that we've had for so many years.
It's interesting because we were talking to Representative Wheeler about, he met with some of these juniors and seniors in high school who because of launch, it's opened up the playbook metaphorically. They're thinking, whoa, I didn't know what I didn't know, and now look at all these options I have. And it is crazy when you take a step back and think some of the biggest decisions people are making, they're 16, 17. And so walk us through how the career exploration works and why that's going to change some of these kids' lives who, when they graduate, some of them just look around and say, where's the closest job? I wasn't really planning ahead. I just need to do something to pay for the bills.
That's a great question. So I had the opportunity to go and tour some schools. I was invited by the State Department a few years ago to go to the East Coast and look at Virginia and some other states at what they were doing. And this last year, I was invited to join some elected officials from across the country and go to Finland.
Oh, wow.
We spent 10 days in Finland and Estonia looking at their education system. We went into elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. We went to 2 colleges of education. We went to their parliament and met with their national education committee at their national level. And then we also spent time in Estonia, which is now the new resurgent of their kind of picking up where Finland has left off as far as excellence in education. And what we really, we've known a lot of these things, but it's a matter of the inertia of change. So one of the things that was last year we passed, the bill that I brought forward was middle school career exploration. So now in Idaho, it used to be that, well, it still is. If you're in the 4th grade in Idaho, you get Idaho history.
Yes.
So now if you're in 7th or 8th grade in Idaho, you're going to get a semester on career exploration in some way, shape, or form. And the whole idea is to start kids. And that's what I found across the country and these countries around the world that really are leaders in this. And the secret is you engage kids early, get them thinking about it, and then you let them kind of self-direct with their interests. Mm-hmm. You get so much more out of them. So a kid that's graduating from high school that's very interested in, pick a topic, maybe a computer security, the math associated with that, everything else kind of sinks in because it's relative. It has relevance to them. So the learning process, rather than being stovepiped, where my 4th period is math, and my 5th period is English, now they have relevance that they bring into this, and it's just a deeper learning process, and it shows up, the effectiveness and the efficiency shows up across the board.
Well, and I remember being a prospective college student, a senior in high school, going on to college campus tours. Yeah. And every campus I visited, whether they offered it or I asked it, the most popular major on all of these campuses was undeclared.
Yeah.
Because a lot of kids were getting to college. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting to college and figuring out what you want, but a lot of students take that 4-year degree and it becomes the equivalent of a master's or a doctorate because they took so long to find out because that wasn't happening in 6th and 7th grade.
Well, an example of that is we measure college graduation typically now in 6 years, not 4.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So you'll see in graduation rates at college, they're looking at 6 years. And, they explain, well, we've got more of a working group and they can't come and they're older. Mm-hmm. I think the average age in Idaho now is 26 in college. So what we really need to do is we need to build a system that really, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think with Superintendent Critchfield, she has this vision too of what do we really want out of our education system? What do we really, and we're in a day when we have competition. We have the school choice issue going on. And, my answer to that is the answer is you don't walk away from public education. That's not a solution. Mm-hmm. Let's fix public education. If you want to have private, that's fine, but let's not walk away and create 2 education systems, the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
Because you're going to create losers.
Yeah.
Really is what you're going to do. So that's going to be another issue for us coming up is that. And I think about this often when I was on the school board here. One of the things I feel successful about is thinking in terms of choice for students and parents. In fact, we have Compass Academy here. And I think, you go over and walk in the door and there's my name on the brass plaque there. But yet people say I don't support school choice.
Right.
What I don't support is sending public dollars, unaccountable public dollars, to private entities. And it just doesn't make sense from a conservative point of view to send millions of dollars out the door and not have some kind of accountability. In fact, the legislation that's written basically says the state shall have no accountability.
Right.
So it's almost in your face the other way.
It appears that although that school choice bill was defeated, it's coming back. It seems as if some of the leadership have doubled down and said, well, if we come back and our supporters come back, the bill's coming back. Does that concern you as being the go-to guy for education on the Senate side, that you're going to have that fight again?
Well, here's two things related to that. One is that school choice, if you ask the question, and there were a number of surveys done this last year, and one survey is, do you support school choice? And the answer will be, 50, 55% of the people in the state, yeah.
Sure.
Now, when you lay behind that, do you support sending public dollars to private and religious institutions for school? That dropped down to about 20 to 25%. So they're really two separate questions.
Right.
So people don't realize that we are following very closely these other states that are 2 and 3 years ahead of us in this process, that already have, taken the bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at Arizona, you can get on the internet and find out the issues they're having, Indiana, other states, that once you bite off on this and you realize that it's more than $40,000 or $40 million, it's more like $400 million.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this, and I realized that what states are doing in this case, because now they're having to pay for this extra hundreds of millions of dollars, what you find them is they'll say, well, we really can't increase taxes, so let's look for another revenue source. So I think it's Indiana that approved gambling in their state as a taxing revenue. You can look at other states and say, well, we're going to approve marijuana as a taxing source. So what do we want to do here? What's it worth? Or is the solution really you go back and say, let's take a hard look at our public education, and if it's not right, let's fix it. Let's make it right.
Yeah, your head's not in the sand saying all is perfect in public education. You're a firm believer that there are changes that need to be made that you're making. But that was my question, was going to be, how much harder is your job as a senator that handles so much education policy if we now have all of these new costs we have to pay if we follow like Arizona has?
Well, not only as chair of Senate Education, but also in JFAC.
Sure.
JFAC is the tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a state constitution that says you will balance the budget. And we typically have X amount of dollars for education, right? That's our education budget. We can say we're going to pull it from somewhere else, but in reality, it's the education budget because it's going to schools. And we can even say we're going to use a tax deferred process, but that's money that's not coming in. I mean, if for example, if you say there's 30,000 students who might take advantage of that in Idaho, let's just say 20,000 of them do it at 5,000, there's $100 million right there. So to go out and come up with $100 million just right off the bat, it's not an easy thing to do. That's why, you start thinking, well, maybe we should legalize gambling or marijuana or something, because if I have to increase my taxes, we have worked so hard in this state to decrease taxes. We've worked so hard to decrease income taxes, property taxes. The average property tax in Idaho went down 18% because of these things we're working on. So for me, that's a tough rub.
And the rainy day funds are full.
They're all topped off.
You would hate to start dipping into those.
Yeah. The rainy day funds are in excellent shape financially. And then I also serve with Senator Cook on the Economic Outlook Committee. Uh-huh. So we look at the beginning of each session, we bring in all the experts and say, show us the crystal ball and let us see what the economy looks like in our state this year and 5 years and 10 years. And what they're telling us is that we have a good outlook of growth in our state, the economy. The challenge is we have to create the workforce to support that.
Yeah.
Because workforce is the number one thing that our business and industries come to us and say, I've got jobs. I've got good paying jobs, but I don't have people that have the right skills to use them. And we're going to find that same issue with the INL.
Well, I'm shocked at the number of employers in Eastern Idaho who have so many remote workers, and not because they want them. So, as I've dealt with recruiting and hiring, it's, Idaho Falls preferred, But when we can't fill that because there's not local people, we have people all over the country who are just joining remotely the team. And those aren't people that are contributing to the tax base here.
Yeah, so true. We want local jobs. We want to fill them with our local folks as much as we can. I would say there's a couple of things I just want to mention before we wrap up, and one is about the INL.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that the new small modular reactors and the micro reactors, what a big thing they are. When I was in Finland, that's what they were talking about.
Really?
Yeah. I was reading that, Poland has ordered 3, Czechoslovakia is ordering 2, and I'm thinking, this is really big. It's coming on. Just in the United States, of the coal fire plants, now this is what they're doing over in Kemmer. They have a coal fire plant, they retire it, they replace it because they've got the infrastructure there with a small modular nuclear. Mm-hmm. You've got a workforce, you've got infrastructure, you've got a community who wants the jobs. You've got the power system, the power lines there. In the United States alone, there are 300 potential sites that could do that too, that could have that same situation, 300. So I see that as just an outstanding. And with our new Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium going here, they are out leading the pack, just saying, "Hey, everyone, let's line up." It's a strategy that has to take place, which at the end of the day is just leadership.
Yeah,
it's really about leadership.
And you're the go-to education guy, and that's been kind of stamped on you. But you're also kind of the go-to energy guy, particularly with your relationship with the lab and energy independence. So I know you've got the answer to the question. As we start sticking these SMRs all over, what's the solution when it comes to the fuel, the spent fuel, the cleanup? How do we manage that?
So all of that technology is there.
Mm-hmm.
We know how to manage. In fact, people don't realize here at the INL, we already have had a fuel processing facility here. The Idaho Chemical Processing Plant that's what it was built originally for. We brought in fuel rods, processed them, pulled out the usable fissile material to use again and make new fuel out of. I also got invited to go to France because I'm connected to the nuclear part of the national picture. And I went over with some legislators. They invited us, and we went to their reprocessing plant.
Oh, yeah?
And we toured what's happening in France. And all the technology and knowledge is there to do it. We have it. This is kind of way up in the sky, but I could see us really working with our state. That's kind of the issue right now, is we have the settlement agreement and other things that have been in place. Those were back in the 90s, and in the culture of nuclear energy in the 90s is different than it is today.
Yeah.
So we need to, I think, look at that, pay some attention to that, get our political folks on board with where we need to be and where we could be, and what that could mean to our economy in southeastern Idaho.
I assume you work pretty close with Director Wagner out at the lab, and that you guys have a good relationship.
Absolutely. I really admire him, and he has great vision of so when you take vision and you line that up with capacity of leadership, that's how you get things done. And I think we are in just an excellent spot in our region. This goes from Laramie, Cheyenne, all the way to Boise. This nuclear corridor that could be supported by this vision of being literally the world center for a lot of this new technology that's about to really come on.
I'd love to get your take on some national issues that, although you as a state senator may not have a lot of influence on, I'm sure you have opinions on. So we'll stick with education and start with, the Biden-Harris administration has announced they're looking at student loan forgiveness. What are your thoughts?
Well, that is not a good thing. For everyone that worked their way through college and did that, I'm not in favor of anything that would be like that. It just has too much of a feel that they're trying to buy votes there. So,
right, we'll put you down for that. We talk about how Idaho's economic outlook looks good. We talk about our growth, talk about where our tax rate is. Now compare that with nationally, as we're feeling the effects of historic inflation, as we're dealing with some of the national economic policies. How do you kind of see the two marrying up?
I see us on the horizon for the next 10 years for our country to continue to grow in a positive way. We just have to be careful on the international front as far as the wars and things that are going on, and make sure that we choose wisely as we go through that piece. But our strength as a nation, the economic strength, has been through innovation.
Yeah.
And if we can evolve our education system to create more innovation, more technology, we're moving from the industrial age to the knowledge age. And it's really all about knowledge now and how do you manage data and all that. So I see it as a positive thing. But for us to maintain our world leadership economically, it's the brain source.
Yeah.
That's the brain trust is really what has got us here and what needs to keep us here. We need to incentivize innovation and embrace the change.
It's a scary time internationally. Last night we saw that Israel fired rockets in Tehran. If you were president, how would you kind of handle this Israel-Palestinian dispute?
Great question. Number one is I'd realize that Israel is going to be Israel.
Yeah.
And if you kick that dog, you're going to get bit. And you just have to know that. And if you know that's how it is and how they're going to react, and no matter who is with or against them, they're always going to be that way. But they still need that support. So I support them. Certainly what happened to start all this off, this most recent round, was wrong. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are paying a price for that. But that's kind of like war. When you think about World War II, when you think about what happened in Japan, we were the ones dropping the bombs, and there were lots of people there who paid a price. But it ended the war.
Yeah.
So tough questions.
Those are tough questions. I love the answers, though. I want to finish with something that I think is going to be talked about for years to come. It's the epitome of historic when it comes to what we're doing with education, not just because of what it's going to do now, but what it's going to lead to another policy. And I'm bringing up, it's House Bill 251. Is that right? The number, the facilities bill?
521.
521. There's my dyslexia showing. 521. House Bill 521. You mentioned it briefly, but I think this is something that is massive, and it's a start. Why don't we start with, what is it about this school facility bill that gets you very excited about the future of Idaho's buildings and infrastructure?
Well, so I co-chaired a committee. Senator Cook was on it with me 3 years ago, a summer interim committee. And our go-to was go out and start digging into this and looking at it. What we discovered was this is a long-running issue. It's been to the Supreme Court 5 times. In 2006, there was a ruling from the Supreme Court to the legislature saying, you have a constitutional obligation to fix this. You're relying too much on the local property owners to support state education when it's the state legislature's responsibility per our Constitution to do that. So this has kind of become a passion of mine. 521 came out as a tax bill, so it didn't come through the education route. It came through the tax route. But I did carry the trailer. 521 had some rough edges. And I was able to work with the House Education Chair, Julie Yamamoto, and come up with what we thought were kind of the rounding edges to make 521 a little more palatable. The 4-day, 5-day issue was part of that. There's a number of things there. But it's significant, and let me just explain why it's so significant to Bonneville County. We're a classic example of trying to pass bonds. When I was on the school board, I think I went through 5 bond elections. We were able to create Compass Academy, and we built 4 new elementary schools. But it took a lot of work. I mean, it took 3 years at a shot. And there were times we spent 3 years and didn't get it passed. But why this is so significant now is the state has made a commitment to step in and help local communities by relieving that dependence on local property tax. So the districts will still come up and say, we're going to run a bond. Yeah. The difference is instead of being X amount, it'll probably be half of that amount because the state's coming in. So just for Bonneville County, let's just take District 93 for the next 10 years. Think about the impact of this. For the next 10 years, when you take last year's 292 bill and this year's 521 and add them together, both related to facilities and bonds, District 91 will receive $106 million in the next 10 years. That's a little over $10 million a year. Yeah. District 93 would be $135 million. So you're talking $241 million coming into Bonneville County as a result of this legislation we've passed. And that was all done which is the part I love the most, in a time when we were lowering taxes, lowering property taxes, and the way it's done is you strategically, in a very conservative way, you look at your growth and you say, how can we manage this growth to reinvest it back into our infrastructure? Mm-hmm. That's the secret. So we looked at sales tax and we said, our sales tax is growing, and we looked at the projections, it looks good. So we take a little piece of sales tax and we bring it over here and we start reinvesting it back in our local communities. So when you think over the next 10 years, think of the jobs, the construction jobs, let alone what it does for the facilities, but the work it'll bring to Bonneville County. So very, very happy about that. And I think is a great thing for our area.
Because it's needed. We hear the horror stories about some of the facilities that need updating and fixed, but it's not a blank check. That money is not going to fix these superintendents' to-do lists, but it'll allow them to leverage it. So these bonds can be half, like you mentioned. I think Highland's a great example of a school that they had a fire, and this bill is going to allow them to actually get a functioning school again, right?
And at the same time, you're not raising your local property taxes.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't have to bond it.
That's so important. To the money comes from local property taxes for this kind of stuff, and for the state to step in with this level of commitment, I think is a good thing.
So, like most things, you don't have long to celebrate it before you identify, well, we have to add, we have to help, we have to do something different. So there's been talk of rural schools needing a little bit more here or there. What comes next? If you're back in the Senate for another couple sessions, what could we expect to see with a facilities type? I don't know if it's considered another trailer or if it's a whole new bill.
Well, that's a great question because, like I say, we worked on this for 3 years.
Yeah.
The part that didn't happen in this bill that we were disappointed was there was an equity piece, meaning if you were a small district, low population, low businesses, so in other words, the people in your community just didn't have the wherewithal to support a $50 million building. Yeah. So for example, you take Clark County or North Gem over there compared to an Ada County. In Ada County, we did, I believe, I have to check my numbers, but we did for rough numbers, we did $15 million in a bond over 20 years. In Ada County, the tax increase annually is $2.2.
Okay.
But in some of these other counties, it's $600.
Oof.
Because they just don't have the population.
Yeah.
You have less pieces of the pizza.
But the building still costs the same.
It still costs the same, and in some cases it costs more because it's so far from town. So to answer your question, I think what we would look at and that we've been discussing is there a side something we can do that brings in a need? Mm-hmm. Can we bring in the other piece of adding in those variables and also the condition of the building, and then have a pot of money that they could apply to, and then it would be based on need. That pot of money could be used to those districts that had the greatest need. And that's the piece that we didn't get in this bill, is the need factor. It was all given out based on number of students in your school. So in Ada County or even Idaho Falls or Bonneville compared to a smaller school, that they still have schools, they still need bus drivers, but they don't have 30 kids in a class, they have 12.
What I love about this, the first time we spoke, you described your political philosophy or leadership style as one that compromise is not a weakness, it's a strength. And that if we can't get 100% of what we want, we'll take what we can and then we'll work on the rest later. And that progress is progress. I think this is a perfect example of other leaders may have said, if I can't get all of it, I'll take my bat and ball and go home. But you took progress. And I think that deserves to be applauded, that we were able to make significant historic efforts. And it's not perfect. And it's not the have-all be-all, but we'll worry about the rest later on.
Yeah, so leadership is really about bringing people along.
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes longer, but you're right. And I think I said this in my debate on that bill was we'll take this win. And I said, this is what I said. I said 3 years ago when we started this, if we could have stood there and said, we're going to get this much money for our facilities, we would have stood up and cheered and say, victory, victory, victory. So why are we complaining today? I mean, think about where we started this discussion.
Yeah. No, it's huge and it's historic. Senator, we know how busy you are. We appreciate you taking some time to talk with us. Appreciate what you're doing in the education space, the energy space, everything you're doing in the Senate on JFAC. So We hope to have you back to cover some of the stuff we didn't get to cover today. You've always been great to join us, but for today, we'll say thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, until next time.